It's true. And it's funny because they lie about stuff that they don't even need to lie about. And that's when you know it's just such a pathological problem, because you'll find themselves lying about stuff that like nobody cares.
Right.
Or stuff that's readily verifiable. I've seen that in my divorce cases too. Somebody's written an email that says, it's good if the child spends some time with you. I think he and I need a break from each other because we've been fighting. You should contact the bus service and have the bus now go to your house. And the next week, they're filing a thing saying that the other parent stole the child. And it's so readily verifiable. All you have to do is produce the email. And you go, well, where is that coming from? And so I find themselves doing things that I would never do, like constantly. I saw it in my cases and I saw it with the narcissists in my own life. Wow, I would never do that. I would never say that. I would never, and yet there they are. No shame.
Over 1,700 new millionaires are created every single day in the U.S. alone, and more than double that across the globe. They're people from all walks of life, most of them people just like you and I. So the big question is this: how are so many people who didn't inherit money or have any special advantages overcoming the odds and becoming millionaires? That's the question, and this show will give you the answers. My name is Jeff Lerner, and welcome to Millionaire Secrets.
Welcome to another episode of Millionaire Secrets. This is Jeff Lerner, your host. Excited as always to be diving into the minds and habits and success secrets of some of the world's most successful people. This is going to be a fun one. I am joined today by Rebecca Zung, who is, I guess once an attorney, always an attorney, but she's formerly in her practice was recognized as one of the best lawyers in America. Part of the legal elite with a focus on family law, did a lot of divorce stuff, but she's had a really amazing transition and journey into creating training and content and building an information and media business around this just fascinating subject of negotiation and specifically dealing with narcissists. And it's like one of those things that's kind of like cancer. As soon as you say the word, everybody's like, oh yeah, I know someone, or I know someone who's had to deal with that. But yeah, you're the only person, Rebecca, that I know that's like explicitly said, this is what I'm focusing on. And it's so cool. I'm excited to dig into it. And I'm really grateful to have you on Millionaire Secrets. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I love everything that you do. And I'm excited about having this conversation with you.
Well, thanks. Thanks so much. I appreciate from someone like yourself that compliment. That means a lot to me. And for some context for everyone, this is not our first conversation. I got to be a guest on your very wonderful podcast, which I highly recommend everyone check out. And we got to talk about bullying, which, is a lot of childhood stuff. And I don't know at the level of childhood whether or not you're actually formally dealing with narcissists, because hopefully at least children aren't so fully formed yet that you can label them that way. But it was some tough talk about dealing with hard things. And sadly, it doesn't end at childhood for a lot of people. It carries on. Only sadly, the opponents get smarter and more calculating, right, than just your schoolyard bully. So maybe we can start with just, how did this become your thing? How did you get hone in on this and frankly, to do so in a way that wasn't just like, oh, this is interesting, but like with the passion and the vigor that you have, or you're really on a crusade. Tell me about how this got started.
Crusade is a good word for that, actually, because that's how I kind of feel in a lot of ways. So I've been a lawyer for over 20 years, and I've only ever practiced in high net worth, complex divorce litigation. So that has been my focus for a long time. And recently, in the last couple of years, I decided to make a change in my life and start focusing on doing other things. So I merged my practice with 2 other guys and decided to give myself the space to start focusing on other things. So the first thing I did was I created, I had been speaking on negotiation for years and years and years, because I had created a talk on negotiation like in 2003 or something, back when I was like trying to develop my practice as a younger lawyer. And so I spoke on negotiation literally all over, including being a keynote at one of the American Bar Association conferences. And so, I mean, I really know negotiation. So that was a natural fit for me. The narcissist part is a whole other story. So I realized last year that I was dealing with 2 narcissists in my own life. I came across a book that I really started to read because I was thinking about maybe doing a video on how to negotiate with a narcissist, and realized I was dealing with 2 covert narcissists who had targeted me and victimized me. And, you know, I'm talking last year, not like before I became a lawyer. And as I realized how stealth and cunning and manipulative they are, I thought, wow, I really could apply what I've learned about negotiation to narcissists. And I had already written a book. I had a book that came out just last year on negotiating. It's called Negotiate Like You Matter. And this was really kind of, as that book was coming out, I was starting to have this realization. So I decided to start trying to do a couple of videos on YouTube on this topic, and they just started blowing up. So that's, you know, I ended up creating a program around it called Slay Your Negotiation with a Narcissist. And it's done very well. Unfortunately, there are a lot of narcissists in the world. So, and it's kind of cathartic for me. And I definitely have a passion for it because of what I experienced in my personal life. And I do want to say a little disclaimer. It was not my husband. It was I always have to say that because my poor husband, people might suspect it was him. Not my husband. You know, it was somebody kind of in a business setting and somebody kind of in our extended family. So, yeah.
Well, that is probably actually a really good disclaimer, because especially with your background as a divorce attorney, like it was probably just would come to people's minds. So I don't want to pry into your personal life, but let's say for illustrative purposes, is there anything you can share about what that experience was like, or what the context was, particularly that might be useful for people that are trying to spot it in their own lives?
Yeah, and I will say, and you and I talked about this on my show, you know, I had experienced being bullied as a child. I'm half Chinese. There was really nobody else that was half Chinese when I was a kid, other than my brother and my cousins, you know. So, you know, at any time you're different, you get singled out when you're on the playground. And it was a horrible experience for me. And I thought I had worked through all that stuff. I became a lawyer. I did all these things. I have a huge, amazing circle of friends. I've dealt with therapists and coaches, and I've had all those people in my life who've helped me. And I thought I was done with whatever those bad, yucky feelings were, right? But, you know, the universe is a funny thing. Sometimes it goes, you know what, let's make sure you're okay. Let me give you a test. And so I got a test in the form of these people. And I found myself feeling a lot of those same things again. They were kind of flooding back. You know, it was lining themselves up with other people and trying to make me feel like I'm excluded, or that they're talking about me and saying things about me that aren't true, and you know, passive aggressive types of things, because these were covert narcissists. So it was saying that they're going to do something and then not doing it, and then trying to gaslight me when I would try to say, what's going on with this, and trying to make me think that we had a conversation about that. Oh, we talked about that. You agreed to that. And I knew that we'd never had that conversation. Money issues, how come I don't see, the money going into the account like it was supposed to be? Oh, I didn't know how to run the charge card for the account. So I put it in my account, I'll transfer it over, and then it never gets transferred. Just constant little things like that. And then the other thing about both of these covert narcissists that I thought was really strange, because narcissists only attach themselves to people who have lots of value. And then I remind my community all the time, they don't attach themselves to you because you have no value. They attach themselves to you because you have so much value, because they want to suck that from you. And so in both of my instances, my experience was that these people were actually copying a lot of the things that I do as their own, copying how I dress, how I talk, things on social media, stealing my ideas, trying to pass them off as their own, things like that, which was also very, very strange. Taking credit for ideas that were mine, just on and on and on. It was just like constant.
So I guess, first of all, you talk about covert narcissism or a narcissist, which is, I guess my question is there an overt narcissist? It would seem that part of narcissism would involve a level of, skullduggery that it's just not so obvious and on display.
Yeah, so the overt or grandiose narcissist is more of the one that you think of when you think of a narcissist. It's that person who's always going around saying how great they are, and that they're the best at everything, and that this was accomplished because of them, and that everybody else is an idiot, and they're the only ones that end up having good ideas or whatever. They're always out there telling everybody how great they are. And, I expect the best table at the restaurant, and I want the best seat in the house, or, they're that type of a person. And I always have to remind people that the other half of narcissism, by the way, is that they have no ability to have any sense of compassion, care, love, or concern for another human being. So it's not just that they're bragging, it's also that they don't have the ability to feel anything for anyone other than themselves. But the covert narcissist is more under the radar. They've kind of figured out that it might not look so good to be out there bragging and telling everybody how great they are. So they use more sort of underground methodology to devalue and debase their targets. So their methodology is more like passive aggression, lining up people to kind of triangulate against you, smear campaigns, say bad things about you to other people, and make them think that, there's something wrong with you, things like that. So they're a little bit more under the radar, and they even a lot of times kind of come across as a victim, like that you're the one that did something to this person, and that you bullied them, that you're the narcissist, and they'll go tell everybody that kind of thing.
So is an overt narcissist just a dumber narcissist who's just not as good at subtlety?
I wouldn't say that, because the overt narcissist actually gets very far a lot of times in business or, situations, because they are very good at, my dad used to say, whatever you say it with authority and people will believe you. And a lot of ways that's really true. And so I think a lot of the grandiose narcissists are the ones that find their way all the way at the, to the CEO level of major companies or something like that.
Yeah, actually, it's so funny. This is such an illuminating conversation. I'm thinking of this one guy who clearly I won't name names because I don't want to, get him refocused on me. But
that's why I don't name names of mine.
Yeah, but he was so shockingly, I remember my own mental sort of quandary and trying to reconcile this person. He was so shockingly arrogant that it defied all sense of propriety or how I was raised. Like, I was like, who could actually get away with this and not literally just not be embarrassed to hear themselves talk?
Right. Yeah,
but he did it so consistently that eventually I actually started to accept a certain amount of it as like the brain is a normalizing machine. And eventually I started to normalize the way this guy was. And I realize now, frankly, there's probably a chance I could have gone toward buying into some of it because he was so casual about being, exceptional from his own perspective. Like you say, if people say it with enough authority, eventually you kind of buy into it. And so for you, do you have a lot of people where part of what you're teaching them is like, raise your standards and don't tolerate this? Because if you do, eventually it'll start to become normal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't put it in terms of raise your standards because I guess that in a way sort of devalues the person and says, obviously you have low standards now or something like that. You know what I mean? But I do put it in terms of you need to create boundaries. I mean, I personally, if you can cut that, it's like a cancer. If you can cut that, like you said at the beginning, it is a cancer. If you can cut that part of the cancer out of your life, that will help you tremendously. Even then, you still have PTSD for a while, but I have been able to, hopefully, God, please, can keep these people out of my life, and let's hope it stays that way. That's been wonderful for me. And I always say, like, the grass is greener, the air smells sweeter, it's all so much better. But the people who are out there who cannot get rid of them, maybe it's somebody in their family or something, where they just are not, or they're just not in a position to leave them yet, for whatever reason. I would just say creating really strong boundaries and just starting to kind of stand up to them a little bit in the form of, I'm not going to allow you to disrespect me. I'm not going to allow you to talk to me that way. When you're ready to have a conversation with me that's productive, great. Or if they're trying to gaslight you and tell you that you had a conversation about something, you can just say, no, we did not have that conversation. That did not happen. Now, obviously, for people who are in situations where they're afraid of some sort of physical backlash or something, in those instances, I recommend that people go to, shelter for abused women or whatever they need to do to protect themselves. But to the best of your ability, create really, really strong boundaries for your own self-respect. And I will say this, and this is what I always say is the not so secret secret. And that is that narcissists are actually the most scared little creatures on the planet. They don't have any sense of self. They're very fragile inside. And they create all this stuff around them to try to get some sense of value out of the external world. And so that's why they attach themselves to people. That's why they devalue people. That's why they treat people poorly. All of that is to try to put a salve on this very wounded ego that they have. And it's to cover the pain, basically.
So, yeah, I mean, and that rings so true based on, I guess, my limited experience. Although as we're talking, I'm realizing at least this one guy, I mean, there's some other people in my life that I'd like have to really assess and be like, were they really a narcissist or do I just not like them? So it feels good to call him that. But this one guy told everything you're saying is just so spot on. Which begs the question for me, at least anecdotally, or, you watch these TV shows, Dateline about, well, so-and-so killed his wife and, later was diagnosed as a raging narcissist. So maybe it's a stereotype or an assumption or overgeneralization, but are the vast majority of narcissists men?
No, definitely not.
That's just how TV makes it out.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean, the two I had to deal with were both women. I mean, I personally, I don't have any scientific data on this at all, but I will say that I personally think that it's probably more of the narcissists who are women, they are probably more covert
Yeah.
than overt because they know that, being out there saying I'm the greatest is usually not, it's frowned upon for women, you know. So I would say they're probably more on the covert side, but no, I mean, in fact, if you look at my YouTube subscribers, which I'm close to 100,000 YouTube subscribers. I think it's like 60-40 as far as who my followers are, 60 women, 40% men. Yeah.
How long have you had that YouTube channel?
I really only started, it's been created for years, but I really only started focusing on it in January, February, March this year. Yeah.
Okay. So less than a year to grow almost 100,000 subscriber following. That's tremendous growth, which I think only speaks to the point, which is this is such a widespread, but it feels like very neglected subject. I mean, there's no, I never remember seeing a class in college on, really how to deal with personality disorders in general, much less narcissism, right? I mean, are you the leader in this field, or is there even a field, or is there just, Rebecca standing there?
Certainly from the legal negotiation perspective, I'm pretty much the only one that's talking about it. There are a lot of psychologists and life coaches out there who are talking about it. But, the interesting thing is that the psychologists that I've spoken to have said even all the way through their doctoral program, it never came up. So they're kind of, self-taught and that sort of thing. There is sort of this whole vocabulary that's come out around it, and many people have written a lot of books on it now at this point. But you're right; it wasn't really taught that much in college, and I'm pretty much the only attorney that's talking about how to deal with them.
Yeah, it's interesting that inside of specific, almost professional tracks, I would say, like MBA programs, law school, medical school, frankly, professions that come with them a label of respect and esteem, probably are more likely to draw in narcissistic personalities who want that label and that esteem. I'm sure there's some guy out there, that's the reason he became a doctor, is because he wanted the power, right? So it is kind of strange that at least those tracks don't actually tackle and maybe you tell me, you went to law school, but do they ever talk about the personality science?
Never. In fact, they didn't even teach us how to practice law. I mean, we learned, about old cases, Marbury versus Madison, and, the theory around how we got to where we are. And there's like some black letter law that we learned, but it was more like general concepts of contract law, or general concept, not the specific law in a particular state. You don't even really learn that until you go study for the bar. Unless you go to a state law school, I think they teach certain state laws, but no, psychology, no, not even close. And as a divorce lawyer, I've been part psychologist for years as a divorce lawyer.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So one of the things you said that I made a mental note to circle back to, you mentioned about narcissists having effectively, to paraphrase, a total lack of conscience, almost a lack of awareness, or an inability to empathize and have compassion, I think is what you said. So that begs the question for me then, is there a difference? And if so, what is the difference or the distinction between a sociopath and a narcissist? Because what you said is kind of how I identify a sociopath, just total lack of empathy or conscience.
Yeah, my understanding of it, and of course, I'm not a psychologist, but I've learned enough to figure out what I need to know to help people negotiate with them so that they can make progress and get what they want. So, but my understanding is that the sociopath and the sociopathic narcissist, which is what we call a malignant narcissist, they have no problem. They not only have no conscience, they have no problem destroying another person's life. So a malignant narcissist has this overlay of sociopathy. So in a divorce setting, this is the person who might accuse a totally innocent person of molesting their own daughter.
Right.
Of, of being an alcoholic or a drug addict to their employer or employees, literally ruin their life for no reason whatsoever. They have no conscience about that. Normally, the other narcissists at least know what they should and shouldn't do so that they still look like they're normal and good people,
Yeah, actually, as you said that, it reminded me of something from my own world experience, not me personally, thankfully, but a case where there was a divorce and the woman accused the man of exactly what you just said, which had absolutely no basis in truth. And I guess, that answered my other question about narcissism being women, because I'm pretty sure based on what you just said, she was one. But so the sociopath, it almost seems like there's a reveling or a thrill in the hurt. Whereas a narcissist is probably more neutral. A pure narcissist, not malignant, is more just neutral on the hurt. It's just what's in it for me.
Correct.
Is that fair?
Correct. And I look at it all as like a continuum, because, a lot of people will say, because like on my YouTubes or something, I might say, I've been recognized as one of the top 1% of attorneys. And 99% of my followers love me. And then I'll always get this one person here and there that'll go, you must be a narcissist because you just said that, and it's like,
right.
It's like, no, I want you to know that I know what I'm talking about so that, you'll feel like you can listen to me. That kind
right.
of thing. So I think it's a continuum because we all want to feel seen, heard, and know that we matter. All of us as human beings, that's just part of being a human. And there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously. I mean, that's why I called my book Negotiate Like You Matter, because we all want that. But I think that, as you go toward the end of the continuum, it's like, I care about other people and I want attention from, I want to feel like I'm seen, heard, and valued. And then as you get down toward the end, it's like, I don't really care that much. I only want to be heard. And then, you get to the narcissism level and it's like 0 for the other person and 100% for me. And then you get into the sociopathy, which is a whole other thing.
Well, that's interesting to view it as a continuum because, I suspect most people would prefer it to be binary so that it can be others and not them, or, and they're never the two shall meet. It brings up for me, have you ever read the book? I don't want to get into a discussion of a book if you haven't read it, but have you ever read the book People of the Lie?
No.
By Scott Peck. I will simply say this for you and for the whole audience. It's a profound book that attempts a scientific analysis of human evil. And it's written by Scott Peck, who's a psychiatrist, but also publicly a Christian. And he basically says, look, we can hate evil all we want. And this is, I feel like, is kind of maybe along the lines of what you do. We can hate evil all we want, but as long as we're moralizing and as long as we're judging, we're not pragmatizing or creating any, treatment or response mechanisms. So for him, as a medical doctor, psychiatrist, it was like, let's look at human evil through the lens of an illness and try to diagnose it, try to codify it, try to, whatever. And in his ultimate conclusion, not to spoil the book, but his ultimate conclusion was that the two contributing components to human evil are narcissism and laziness. Mm. And I read the book years ago. I've reread it in part since, but I've never been able to forget that. Mm-hmm. Narcissism conjoined with laziness creates the ultimate breeding ground for human evil. Mm. And I'm curious, again, I know you haven't read the book, so maybe it's not fair, but in abstract, forget about the book, but just that idea of like taking the narcissist and combining it with a person who's essentially too lazy to even do a hard thing. And that's to like battle his own tendencies, his or her own tendencies, right? Is what creates this ultimate evil embodiment of evil. Do you have any response or thoughts on that other than, Jeff, you said you weren't going to talk about a book I haven't read, and now you are?
Well, I think it probably, without reading the book, but I'll just give you my thoughts. I think it probably still goes back to this sense of no self-worth, that there was some sort of something that happened, from everything I've read about narcissism, there's something that happened to them when they were 5 years old or 6 years old or somewhere in that range that caused them to come to this conclusion that they have no internal value, that there's something inherently broken within them. And so they came to this conclusion that in order for them to get anything in the world, they have to manipulate it, and they have to lie about it, and they have to get people, nobody's going to want to actually just be with them. They're going to have to manipulate it and control it and do things to make them feel less. And because if they don't make them feel less, then they're not going to think that they're good. You know what I mean? And so I think, it all stems back to this complete lack of sense of self internally. And laziness could be something similar. I don't know, but, other people should do it for me. The sense of entitlement kind of a thing, which is part of narcissism too. And I don't know, but that's just my thought when you said that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like it's this fundamental decision that like, and this is perhaps cautionary for people who maybe trend too much towards pessimism, is like, if you have a belief that nothing good could happen to me of its own accord because either I don't deserve it or just because the world isn't good, then the conclusion is going to be the only way to get good things to happen is going to be to manipulate. So I'm just going to park that in my own mind for a little while and be like, okay.
Well, it's true. And it's funny because they lie about stuff that they don't even need to lie about. And that's when it's just such a pathological problem, because you'll find themselves lying about, I don't know how many things they did or whatever, stuff that like nobody cares.
Right.
Or stuff that's readily verifiable. I've seen that in my divorce cases too, where, somebody's written an email that says, it's good if, the child spends some time with you. I think he and I need a break from each other because we've been fighting. You should contact the bus service and have the bus now go to your house. And the next week, they're filing a thing saying that the other parent stole the child, and, and it's so readily verifiable. All you have to do is produce the email, and you go, well, where is that coming from? And so I find themselves doing things that I would never do, like constantly. I saw it in my cases, and I saw it with the narcissists in my own life. It's like, wow, I would never do that. I would never say that. I would never, and yet there they are, no shame.
So I'm curious, and for everybody listening, obviously Rebecca is an expert on this subject, and I find it a fascinating subject. I also want to talk a little bit, and we'll get to this here in a bit. I also want to talk a little bit about how you've been able to kind of turn this into an information business that's clearly successful, because it's allowed you to step away from a really successful law practice. And I know a lot of my entrepreneurial audience will be interested in that. But first, I'm curious, acknowledging that your set of evidence or your set of experience is confined to people going through a divorce, which I imagine narcissism becomes toxic and creates divorce often. And also, it sounds like, based on who you were practicing with, high net worth people, which probably disproportionately attract narcissists. But so given that, I understand that. I'm curious your take on how prevalent this really is in society, these types of people.
I've seen varying degrees of, percentages, but basically from what the majority of what I've read, it's about 1 in 10.
I mean, that's the same stat we hear about homosexuality. This is clearly, although for the record, homosexuality is not a problem. I'm just speaking about the statistic, but it's a very widespread problem for sure.
Yeah. And
okay.
you just think about if each one of those people narcissistically abuses, 10 people in their lifetimes, 5 people in their lifetimes, even if it's 2, there's not one person that's ever going to be immune from it.
Yeah, that's crazy. So then in your case, I would assume that the default guidance would be, if you can get away from them, get away from them. Like, don't engage. Engagement is plan B, right? But assuming you can't, like you're in a business partnership, you're in a marriage, whatever, at risk of being laughably oversimplistic, can you give a basic summary of your negotiation or management strategy for having to be in those relationships? That clearly, if somebody wants to go deeper on, that's why you're out there and they can go look at your stuff.
Yeah. I mean, what I say is that always comes back to the concept of narcissistic supply. And supply is what they need to feed their ego. So all of the things that we've been talking about are actually what is called narcissistic supply. So supply can come in the form of prestigious friends, the right money, living in the right house, in the right neighborhood, and all of those things. But supply also comes from what I call the underbelly of supply, which is debasing, devaluing people, controlling people, lining up flying monkey smear campaigns. All of those things are also supply. But when you go to negotiate with a narcissist, you have to understand the concept of narcissistic supply, or you will not get anywhere. Oh. And that is that they're they don't know this, but it's a subconscious thing, and that is that for a narcissist, there's like the diamond level supply, the one that they'll keep no matter what. They'll do whatever they can to retain. And then there's like the coal level supply, which is what, it burns and it gives them energy and it's like a fuel, but it's not like the best one. And so, jerking you around, treating you badly, making you squirm, intimidating you, all that kind of stuff is actually coal level supply. Diamond level supply to a narcissist is how they look to the community, what everybody thinks of them. And so the key to negotiating with them is going to be in threatening a source of supply that is going to mean more for them to keep than the supply that they get from making you miserable. That's it in a nutshell.
Huh. Yeah, this is just so interesting. So here's a question. And I guess the question in a question. How does a person know if they themselves are a narcissist? And the second level question is, does a willingness to ask the question preclude them from being a narcissist?
I think that there, again, it's this continuum thing, right? So right. I think that there's people who might have narcissistic tendencies who might go, okay, my wife is about to leave me, or something's going to happen. So let me take a look at myself. Let me go to a therapist and see what's going on and see if I can fix this in some way. And then there's like narcissists that are just so far gone that they're never going to step foot inside a therapist's office, because that to them means that they're going to be exposed and, their survival mechanism is kicking in. And so they're really never going to be rehabilitated. And that's honestly the majority of narcissists. So, if you are a person who cannot say sorry, who actually doesn't really care, like will do whatever you need to at the expense of anybody else to get what you want, and you're not willing to apologize unless you need to manipulate a situation, then you're probably a narcissist.
Yeah, there's this random work that I read, and I cannot remember for the life of me how I read it or why it made such an impact, but it was the letters of Saint Teresa, who was an old, I guess, Christian saint, worked in the church or whatever.
I went to Catholic school, so
okay. So she talked about the willingness what she said, the willingness to serenely bear the trial of being displeasing to ourselves. To serenely bear the trial of being displeasing to ourselves. And it seems like the ability to bear that trial is almost the way you're describing it. That's the litmus test for a narcissist. A narcissist simply cannot bear the trial of being displeasing to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, doing that self-study and taking a look and being, I've been married for 20 years, right? And both of us have had times where you've had to realize that maybe you're hurting the other person and say sorry and do all these things, right?
Right.
I mean, when you're in a relationship with a narcissist, they'll only say sorry if they need to, just to like manipulate the situation and
or keep you from leaving. For example,
keep you from leaving, get you to just forget about whatever it is that they're talking about. Then they move into, oh, it's never going to happen again, and
right.
whatever they need to say to get you to stop at the moment, right? So, I've heard from some psychologists that some can be rehabilitated to the point where they know how they're supposed to act, like, oh, if you're sick, instead of just, they don't care at all, which is a lot of narcissists. They know, okay, if I want this person to stay, I should pretend I care, like, how are you feeling or whatever, even if they don't, but I always tell people, it's like, why do you want to be with somebody who's pretending to care?
Yeah.
Like, that's no fun.
Do you think there's any bit of you talk about something happening when people are 5 years old. Do you feel like there's a nature component to this, or is it all nurture, so to speak?
Just from what I've read that different psychologists and psychiatrists have written, and what I've said when I've, what I've learned from interviewing them, I've heard it's more of a nurture component, but I guess who really knows?
Who cares?
You can't tell when they're born as a newborn. You can't tell.
Yeah, and I guess we're never going to be doing DNA testing for narcissism. I suppose the civil rights base wouldn't allow for that anyway. So, okay, so this is super cool. I will tell you straight up, if it were just if I had no audience to serve, and knowing that my audience is entrepreneurial and many of them are internet-based entrepreneurs, I would stay in this full-on probing of the human condition camp, because I just think this is amazing, and I think the work you do is amazing. But that said, in service to the audience, let's talk a little bit about how you were able to take this and pivot out of what I can only imagine was a very lucrative legal career to basically be able to do this full time, which I'm sure has to feel good because you're serving people who really need
definitely
service. But from kind of a tactical perspective, like, how did it emerge that this actually had enough meat on the bones to be like your new career? And what'd you do?
Well, it wasn't easy. I mean, I had built, if not the largest, one of the largest family law practices in Southwest Florida. And it was what I wanted to do. But, in my heart of hearts, I am a creator. I am an entrepreneur. And so I enjoyed building that practice and creating the brand for it. I didn't really love the gerbil wheel of running it on a day-to-day basis and carrying 50-something cases at a time and having a huge, massive staff and lots of lawyers and paralegals working for me. And it was just in the middle of people who were unhappy all the time. It was just, it really started to wear on me. It started to wear on my health, on my personal life. And, so I mean, I'm not saying for everybody, oh, walk away from your practice. I mean, if it's serving your soul and you're happy, then great. I look at these things as soul decisions. And so for me, I knew I wanted to do other things. I knew I didn't want to sit there and handle people's divorces for the next 25 years. It just wasn't going to be for me. And so when I decided I didn't want to do that anymore, I just needed to come up with a plan. I approached another attorney in town who I had a tremendous amount of respect for and had done he'd been always wonderful to me, and asked him if he would be willing to let me merge my practice in with him and his team. And we came to an agreement where they pay me a percentage of everything I bring in. And I'm still a partner. My name's on the firm, and I still handle some cases. But that allowed me to step away and still have an income.
Okay.
And I moved, I still have a home back in Florida, but we moved to be in California for part of the time as well, so that I could also have breathing room. And I wanted to focus on my daughter, who was still in high school at the time. She just started college this year. And that was when I was able to start to think about, okay, what do I want to do? And I was listening to an entrepreneur's podcast, probably something similar to this. And I heard Russell Brunson on that podcast, who is the founder of ClickFunnels. And he said, oh, if you want a free copy of my book, go to this website and get it. And it was like $7 for shipping or something.
Mm-hmm.
Little did I know it was a funnel. I was like, oh, free book. Awesome.
Right.
So I went and got it and just read the book, and it was called Expert Secrets. And I was like, oh, cool. I could maybe do something like this. And I first did a bunch of divorce master classes, which did so, frankly, because I think, there wasn't enough of an urgency, but I do use those now actually as my upsells and downsells in my funnel. So they didn't end up going to waste. Wrote my second book on negotiation, and I started a podcast, and I just, I finally had space to actually think. And I took courses on information, I don't know, what you call this, information businesses or whatever
Right.
it's called. And just really tried to learn about it. And that's what I did, honestly.
Well, there's so much, I think, gold in the story you just told. A few things I'm going to just comment on briefly. One is, I resonate with you because you went out, you spent, I think you said practice law for 20 years, a couple decades, maybe not doing what your heart and soul most deeply longed to do, but doing a thing that was enjoyable enough and could equip you and prepare you for like your soul's purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And I kind of feel the same way. I've floundered. I was a musician, and I went between different businesses, and I was a good musician and a pretty bad entrepreneur for a long time, but it was all just education. It was all just preparing me to really turn the corner and go, okay, I finally now, the implied element of expert secrets is that like, you have to have expertise
Correct.
To sell your secrets, right? So like, it's totally fine. If you're 17 years old and you're listening to this, and I actually have a lot of teenagers in my audience, like, you got time. It's okay to go in the workforce. It's okay to get a sales job. It's okay to go to law school. I know a guy who went to medical school and started a YouTube channel teaching people how to get into medical school and how to study for their MCAT. And now he doesn't practice medicine. He just does that. Like, it's fine. Just always be learning and growing. And so I really resonate with you about that. But also, you mentioned that you've always been entrepreneurial. And the fact that in law, I know a lot of attorneys. My mom was an attorney. I went to school with a bunch of people that became attorneys. Most of them are not at a place in their career where they've built the brand, they've built the reputation, they've built the equity to be able to effectively automate their legal income. Like you didn't cut off your legal income. You just cut off your legal practice and automated the income for at least some period of time.
Still do. I do a lot of the new client meetings still. So, and I let them know, but I still get paid every month, and it's been over 3 years, and I still have a very strong
meetings. So you do the new client meeting. So essentially you're in the customer acquisition. Your legal practice is entirely now probably the easiest part, which is for someone who's good and has the reputation, which is customer acquisition.
Correct.
Right. And then you hand them off. That sounds to me like an entrepreneur's law practice, right?
It is.
Let me go do the marketing, and then I'll set up fulfillment on the back end.
Correct.
Yeah. I love that. I think it needs to be noted that like this stuff, it doesn't always happen in the first year, but eventually it all kind of gels together when you think about leverage, you think about automation, you think about systematization, you get good at marketing, you understand the value of information, you learn how to build funnels, and the undertone is you get really, really good at things. Like, the reason you're able to do this is because you are just such a damn good attorney that you have, capital, you have credibility, you have posture, you have all this stuff, these intangibles, right?
Yeah, I mean, I spent years building my brand. I mean,
Right.
People will ask me, lawyers will ask me how I did it. And, I tell them there's no secret magic.
Right.
Literally, I've spoken to every Rotary Club in Southwest Florida. I've spoken at every League of Women Voters Club, every single, American Businesswomen's Association, this, that, and the other thing, you name it. Hadassah, the Jewish women's groups. I mean, if they asked me to speak, I was there. I mean, I was writing articles. I was, this was before the age of podcasts and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so there's no magic. I was busting my ass. That's how I built the brand.
Well said. That's a mic drop right there. So where do you see this from here? I mean, considering that at least for now, you're kind of in your own category, your own niche, and I'm sure that won't last for long, right? But
yeah, well, people will see what I'm doing. They'll start doing it too. Yeah.
But where do you see this going? Like, what's your 10, 20-year vision for how you can really impact the world with this crusade?
Well, I think it was you that had said to me, whoever's first in the space ends up, wasn't it you? Was that you that told me that?
I don't know. I have to go back and watch.
Somebody said to me, who's ever first in the space continues to dominate, continue to have, usually 70% of the market share or something like that. Mm-hmm. I thought it was you, but I don't know. But anyway, the next thing is, I'm going to be, having programs that specifically focus on negotiating with a narcissist in business, and then one just for divorce. Right now, I just have the one course and it's for both, which is great. And I've sold lots of them since I launched it on March 11th. I still think it's, I could just leave that and be fine. But just being me, I want to make them better. I want to make them more improved. I want to specifically niche something just for people in business and then just for people in divorce. And, I am, at my core, I'm a business person. I've negotiated a lot as a business person. So I really know about that too.
Yeah. I think a lot about, to your point about the category creator, like I'm in the personal and professional development category. And literally the number one comment I get most from people who see my, superficially, who see 2 minutes of one of my YouTube videos and don't dig any deeper is like, oh, you're kind of like Tony Robbins. Oh, he created the category, right? Like, we're going to be compared to him for hundreds of years, I'm sure. So yeah, someday people will be like, oh, you're like Rebecca Zung.
Yeah.
You're one of those narcissism crusaders. Well, listen, since we're out, only because we're out of time, I'm going to wrap this, but this is just so fascinating. And I think the work that you do is so cool. And I'm so glad you got to come share it. Toot your horn though. How can people come get deeper into this world? Because at least 1 out of 10 or multiple out of 10 people that are listening, literally have this issue in their lives. Where do I send them?
So my first choice would be my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Rebecca Zung. Please come, please visit, please watch and subscribe. And I also have a free Crush My Negotiation prep worksheet, which is at winmynegotiation.com. That's the URL. And it's basically an ebook. It's 15 pages. People have actually told me they've used it to win their negotiations without even buying one single one of my products. So definitely grab that. My website is RebeccaZung.com. I'm on Instagram at Rebecca Zung. I have a free private Facebook group, by the way, which is Narcissist Negotiators with Rebecca Zung. I started it at the end of June, and I have 17,000 people in that. So come join us there too.
What a just amazing vein a horrible vein, but also amazing vein you've tapped into in culture with this.
Yeah.
Just so cool to see the growth. And we'll grab all those links and we'll put them in the descriptions wherever this appears. Rebecca, I just want to say again, thank you so much for being a guest on Millionaire Secrets. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to all the viewers and listeners out there. You are the best part of Millionaire Secrets and why we do what we do every day. Thanks again. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for watching Millionaire Secrets. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and leave us a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you know whenever we release a new episode. Also, if you want to learn the fastest way to become a millionaire in the new economy, click the link in the description below to claim your free copy of my book, The Millionaire Shortcut. And don't forget, Millionaire Secrets is available on all the major podcast platforms as well. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you can listen on the go. Thanks for watching.